Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's interactive discussion between Mr. Stephen Schwarzman, the CEO, co-founder, and chairman of Blackstone, and Mr. Nandan Nilekani, the founding chairman of the Unique Identification Authority of India and the chairman and co-founder of Infosys. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out the time to be here with us today. Today's discussion is going to focus on the transformation of technology in the world and the role of India in this revolutionary journey. The discussion will also draw on anecdotes from Mr. Schwarzman's recently published New York Times bestseller, What It Takes, Lessons in the Pursuit of Excellence. This event will truly be one to remember. To take the event forward, I'd now like to call upon the stage the Director of IIT Bombay, Mr. Chaudhary, to give the welcome address.
Good evening, distinguished guests, visitors, my faculty colleagues, and students. We have a great evening lined up for all of you. We'll be hosting two of the most interesting personalities right here during their conversation. On behalf of IIT Bombay and on my personal behalf, it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Stephen Schwarzman, the founder and CEO of Blackstone Group and one of the most distinguished philanthropists of our time. I also take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Nandan Nilekani, co-founder of Infosys, a pioneering technocrat responsible for creation of Unique Identification Authority of India, a philanthropist from whom IIT Bombay has benefited tremendously, and above all, an alumnus of IIT Bombay. The journey of IIT Bombay is quite similar to those of both of our distinguished visitors this evening. From a very humble beginning of about 60 years ago, today IIT Bombay boasts of being the best STEM education center in India and also has an excellent reputation worldwide. About 60% of our students are in the graduate school. We also have the largest number of PhD graduating in these particular areas in India. Our alumni, they have distinguished themselves through their accomplishment in diverse areas all over the world. We also have a great entrepreneurial ecosystem in the campus. And we also strive to produce the best educational experience that our students can have in our campus. But we still have miles to go before we can catch up with the very best in the world and to be able to also meet the societal obligations and expectations of the country. Looking forward, we must say that all of you have distinguished yourself in your life, in your career. We need your help and support and guidance in taking IIT Bombay collectively to a higher level. And with that, I must end my talk by welcoming you all to this evening, and I hope that you will enjoy this evening when two of the greatest innovators are actually in conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhary. I would now like to invite on stage Mr. Amit Dixit, who is a distinguished alumni of IIT Bombay. He is currently the co-head of Asia Acquisitions and the head of private equity in India for Blackstone. Please give a huge round of applause for Mr. Dixit.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks a lot for coming. Really appreciate all of you coming from all over Mumbai, some people out of Mumbai, and coming all the way to Powai is not easy. I want to first thank my wife for not planning a vacation in December because I showed up at an IIT alumni lunch. I happened to meet Professor Chaudhary for the first time, and I discussed Steve's visit in India, and that's how this whole idea germinated. We thought it would be an outstanding opportunity to get Steve to talk about his passion, artificial intelligence, with Nandan, who also has a huge passion for artificial intelligence. So that's how this idea germinated, and here we are. And the last time I was on this stage was when I was getting my certificate in 1995, graduating from here. So it's a good coming back. For those of you don't know as much about Blackstone, we are the world's largest alternative asset manager. We manage about 600 billion. I think my mic is, okay, it's back on. We manage about $600 billion globally, and publicly listed in New York, ticker is BX, so all the information about us is publicly available. Been in India for 15 years, we are also the largest private market investor in India now. We've invested over $15 billion in India, and we've invested $6 billion just in the last 1 year. So our pace of investment in this country is accelerating, and lo and behold, technology is the single largest area of investments for Blackstone. So in the private equity business, which I run, we have invested in multiple technology companies, Infosys, Intelenet, TaskUs, IBS Software. And in the real estate business, which my partner Tuhin Parikh runs, he's also in the audience, we are the largest commercial landlord in the country, and we own a majority of the IT parks. Overall, we own 120 million square feet, and our tenants are IBM, Cognizant, companies like that. So both through private equity and through real estate, we have made a big bet on technology. And what better place to talk about technology than IIT Bombay, because as you all know, IIT has now produced alums which are running world's biggest technology companies. So the CEOs of Google, of IBM, Adobe, and several others are IIT alums. And I thought this was the right place to have a conversation around technology, and the right place with the right people. So Steve Schwarzman, who's the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Blackstone, he started Blackstone 35 years back, and building Blackstone in one of the world's largest companies now with a $75 billion market cap. Steve, in his personal capacity, is very passionate about artificial intelligence. So he has donated last year $350 million to MIT to start an artificial intelligence program after his name at MIT. Also, he's very passionate about education and making sure the giving culture is there. So he has made similar donations to Oxford, to Tsinghua University, to Yale, to Stanford, and he's written a book now, which I highly encourage all of you to read. It's on your copies are right there. It's a book about his life, his career, and it's a book for everybody, how to be successful in whatever you choose to do. So I thought this would be a great opportunity for Steve to talk about his life lessons, and he'll be having a conversation with probably one of the most famous IIT alums, Nandan Nilekani, who's a technologist his entire career, now the chairman of Infosys, which is a $45 billion market cap company in the Indian IT services space. And on the personal side, Nandan is also funding a lot of artificial intelligence work that he's doing. So that's all I had to say, and I'm sure you're waiting for the chief guest. So with that, let me welcome Steve Schwarzman and Nandan Nilekani.
Steve, it's great to have you here at IIT Bombay, and I think all of them will have a treat listening to you. First of all, let me say that your book is very, very readable, and I think you have been honest, you have put it all out, great anecdotes, and great lessons. So what inspired you to write this book?
Well, part of it had to do with getting older. And what happens as you learn things yourself over a long period of time, I started our business 35 years ago, you actually make sufficient number of mistakes that you'd like to help other people not make the same mistakes. You may make others, but you shouldn't make the ones we did. And I thought it would be really useful to describe how you get to do things, create things, grow big things, figure out how to interview other people, how to imagine great things and make them happen.
But when you started 35 years back, did you imagine that you would create this phenomenal company, the world's biggest PE firm, whatever, multi-class firm?
You know, not really. We had a strategic plan, which to show you our lack of imagination, we're still executing. And the plan was pretty simple. We would first go into the M&A advisory business because you didn't need any capital, and people paid you millions of dollars for talking. So I would recommend to you, if you can talk and have people give you millions of dollars, you should try it. The second thing is we wanted to go into the private equity business, which we did. And the third thing is we wanted to always adapt to new things. And so we set up a concept in our strategic plan called affiliates, where we would go into financial businesses at a time that we thought that particular investment strategy was so easy to be successful that even I could do it. And we had two other criteria. The first is that we'd be able to attract someone who was a 10 out of 10 to run that business, somebody who was a world scale individual. And the second criteria was that the business itself would generate intellectual capital such that it would make our existing businesses stronger. So I guess we were like early in the data business, but we didn't call it data. I call it intellectual capital. And the more of it you have, the easier it is to be successful.
You know, one of the things is that you talked about hiring people who are 10 on 10. And, it's logical to say we should hire people as smart or smarter than ourselves. But in reality, that doesn't happen. And, organizations sort of decline because you hire people less smarter because you're insecure and so on. So you never fell into that trap. You always hired the best. So is that a key to building a great organization, is attracting people as smart as you or smarter than you?
Well, I had a real advantage that when I went to high school, I went to a public high school, and I was in the class for the smart kids. The only problem was I was the least smart kid in the class. So my high school had about 950 people in each grade, and sort of the accelerated learners had about 35 to 40 people, and I was always consistently right at the bottom. So even though I ranked pretty well out of 950, that wasn't my relevant set. My relevant set were all these super smart people who probably went to IIT. And so I was always struggling.
That's why you hired people from IIT. And
well, I've gotten lucky, and I've gotten smarter. So I always recognized that other people were smarter than me. And even though I tried as hard as I could, I couldn't beat them. And so I never had any arrogance about maintaining a dominant position. I always felt, judgment-wise, I was quite good. But in terms of raw intelligence, other people were better. So getting all of us together was a winning hand.
One of the great anecdotes in your book, and I haven't heard of anyone else doing this, is that you called up the Dean of Admission at Harvard College. You were 17 years old. You went to a payphone, put a bunch of coins, and told him that he should give admission in Harvard. So where did you get that confidence as a 17-year-old kid in Philadelphia to call up the Dean of Admissions to say, you better admit me into Harvard?
Well, I guess I wasn't shy. I really wanted to go to Harvard because at that time, Harvard was regarded as the best school, and I wanted to go to the best school so I could have the best outcome. And unfortunately, I was put on the waiting list, which I thought was a mistake. And so I figure, how do I reverse this? I ought to call the person in charge and let him know that he made an error. So it's very intimidating as a 17-year-old to call the Dean of Admissions at Harvard. It's like dialing God. And how do you do that? Well, the first thing is you look in the phone book and find out what the phone number is for the admissions department. And I just called it. And they said, who are you, Harvard admissions. And I said, could I talk to Dean, whatever his name was? And they just put me through. So this gentleman picks up the phone, and I announced myself. I said, I'm Steve Schwarzman from Abington High School in Abington, Pennsylvania. And he says, yes. And I said, I'm calling because I think you may have made an error, and I'm on your waiting list, and I think it would be really terrific if I were admitted. And he said, how did you ever get to me? He said, I don't talk to students. And meanwhile, I'm putting these quarters into the phone, which then we didn't have cell phones, yeah. So they were pay phones, and every time you put a quarter in, it would make a noise, like ba-bump, ba-bump. And I thought this was going to be a long conversation, so I had all these quarters in my pocket, only to find out that the dean was not as interested in a long conversation as I was. And he said, well, where else did you get in? I said, well, I got into Yale. He said, well, Yale's a fine school. I'm sure if you go there, you'll have a good time. I said, I'm sure I will too, but that wasn't why I was calling. I wasn't calling for advice. He said, well, the problem is that we've had a very high yield this year, and no one will be getting into Harvard off of the waiting list. So this was a problem I did not know how to overcome. And so he said, I feel really sorry, but I'm sure you'll have a good time at Yale. At which point, I was soaking wet. I was so nervous. Who calls somebody like that? Only a truly desperate person. And I failed. And I remember walking away from the payphone. My shirt was stuck to me because I was so much nervous perspiration.
But that was a big mistake. They should have admitted you to Harvard.
Well, that's what he said years later. He wrote me a note. It was a funny thing. We were talking beforehand, and a friend of his was in to see me for business. And he was a member of the Harvard Corporation, which runs the university. And I told him the story, and he said, well, the dean that time was Dean so-and-so, and I recognized the name. He said, would you mind if I told him this story? I said, no. I mean, what do I have to lose? I mean, it's a long time since I went to college. So a few weeks later, I got a letter from that former dean of admissions. And he said, Dear Mr. Schwarzman, so-and-so told me about this conversation that you had called me in 1965. He said, I remember that phone call. And I remember it because I never got a phone call before or since from a student in the midst of admissions. And I remember I told you there was no room, and I assume you did go to Yale. Now, he said, I started reading about you about 30 years ago, every time you did something big or so forth, and then you gave Yale $150 million. So he said, I realized it was one of the worst admissions mistakes I'd ever made. And I just want to tell you, it's hard when you're dean of admissions and you're dealing with 17-year-olds. You don't quite know which one's going to make it. He said, you told me you would. I guess I should have listened, but there was no room at the inn in any case. So that was my Harvard story.
I think, the thing that comes out from your book, one is this supreme self-confidence. You call him the dean of Harvard and all that. And the other is, your drive. Here you are. You don't need to do this. You have everything you can have and want to have. But you still get up in the morning and run like it was 50 years back. So what keeps you going?
Well, it may be a lack of maturity. I'm not sure. From when I was young, I always wanted to accomplish things, do things. I love competition, particularly athletic competition. And those of you in this audience who are younger than the two of us, which is almost everyone, will find that your personality, if you're grounded, doesn't really change. And things that you accomplish are irrelevant because all that matters is what you're doing now and what you're doing next. And if you live that way, as we were talking, you still think you're like 38 or something, even though you're not. And that enthusiasm, that application, the idea of a continual invention and creating new organizations and doing things is, no one has to reward you for that. It's its own reward. It's fun. It's expressive. At some point something bad physically happens to everybody. You can't stop that. But in the meanwhile, you can have the same amount of energy, the same amount of vision, if not more, than you had when you were younger. And it makes the day just completely, sort of disappear every day. And you can take risk, but the risk is much less because you actually know yourself and situations better. It's fun.
I think all the people in this room will benefit from this, the fact that, you're really a model for how to keep going. There's another important, very nice story in your book is when you got the offer from DLJ and they offered you $10,000 salary and you said you wanted $10,500, and this was to Mr. Donaldson, one of the D of the DLJ, and he said, why do you want 10,500 instead of 10? He said that will be the highest from my class in Yale, and therefore I want 10,500. And I don't think anybody in history, a kid coming out of college, had demanded a bigger salary, and then he came back and actually gave you that salary.
Yeah, this was pretty crazy. I think back on this, and what was I thinking? I didn't even have a job. And somebody introduced me to Bill Donaldson, who became...
Who's also from Yale?
Yeah, somebody from Yale. And Bill became the first dean of the Yale School of Management. And he was head of the New York Stock Exchange, and his company, Donaldson, Lufkin, Generette, was the first company that went public as a brokerage firm. I met him, and he asked me to go around and talk to the other people, at his firm, and then he asked me how it went. I said, from whose perspective? He said, what do you think they thought? And I said, I think they thought you were crazy, wasting their time with me. I never had an economics course. I still haven't. I didn't know anything about accounting. I knew nothing about anything. And so I was wasting time with these people. So he sort of thought that was funny. And he said, well, I'm glad you had the opportunity. I'll give you a call in a little bit, a few days. So he calls me and he said, well, you know, we'd like to have you. It was before I went into the Army, so it wasn't meant to be in perpetuity. He said the compensation is $10,000. Well, I didn't have $5. And I said I wanted 10.5. So he said, it's 10. It's not 10.5. So I said, I want 10.5, or I'm not going to take the job. And he said, why do you care? I said, because I want to be the highest paid graduate from my class at Yale, and somebody else has got 10,000. He said, well, that's interesting for you. It means nothing for me. He said, I don't care. I said, well, I wouldn't expect you to care. I care. And I said, what's the difference for you? It's $500. It's not much. And I'll feel so much better. He said, Steve, I'm not in the business of making you feel better. And I said, Bill, I said, you know, I'd really like to take this job, but I'm not going to do it at 10,000. So he said, I can't believe we're having this conversation. Now, he was the one mature person in the conversation. And so he said, let me call you back. So I called back the next day. He said, you know, I thought about it. What's an extra 500, 10.5? So, you know, that was, you know, when you ask me about stories like this, it's embarrassing to be the person involved with it. I mean, if somebody did that to me now, I'd say, it's 10, goodbye.
You don't let these guys do any negotiations with you?
Well, I've got some of my people here. This is not supposed to be a template.
Okay, you guys, Blackstone guys, don't listen to this one. But I think one of the things that struck me, because in that we have the similar view, which is, you know, I believe that thinking big or thinking small takes the same effort. So might as well think big. And when I read your book, I realized you also have come to the same conclusion, that same effort to think big or think small, so might as well think big. So that's also been your motto in some sense.
Yeah, well, you should know.
Yeah, well,
I mean, look at what you've done with your life. Sort of amazing, right? I mean, you took on the identity program for the, you know, sort of the biggest identity program in the world.
People, yeah.
In the world, you know, Infosys, one of the most amazing companies in the world. And what you find in life is doing almost anything entails a lot of friction,
yes,
a lot of difficulty, people you need to convince of things that they haven't even thought about. And if you're going to do that, I've always felt that, you know, human beings can only make a massive commitment to one thing at a time. It's very hard to dabble when you're creating something new, because most people, at least in New York, don't even want you to be successful, let alone you doing all these things you've never done before. And so it requires really 120% of rated capacity. And if you're going to do that, you better find something wonderful to do that can be expanded, because you also can recruit people better if you have something of real scale. And if you're pursuing something of real scale, typically it's something that somebody else hasn't done. So it demands even more effort. But when you get it done, you've got something unique, which has all kinds of benefit. And if you don't pick something that's really consequential, that when you're in the midst of doing whatever you're doing and something much better comes along, you actually can't drop what you're doing, because you've got commitments to people who've given you capital, commitments to people who've trusted you, and you can never break that bond of trust with people who've basically committed their lives to this mission, this adventure. And so once you pick something, you're more or less stuck with it. And so you have to be extremely careful about what you pick in life because you could miss something much better. And it's hard to not to commit for something if it's sort of good enough. It's sort of like marrying the wrong person because it's good enough. You know, that's a mistake, by the way, you only made once.
But I think, as you said, I think being focused and also not doing things is equally important. Yes. Maintaining the clarity of focus. The other thing I find with thinking big is actually there's often less resistance to your ideas.
Yes.
Because first of all, often people don't get it, what you're doing, so they can't stop you. And then they think he's full of moonshine, so let him have his fantasies. You know, I remember when I was in the government, I had a car, I was eligible for a government car because I didn't want to drive in a flashy car, I wanted to drive in a government car. So it was a Maruti, and if I had wanted to upgrade that to a better car, the decision would have to go to the cabinet because everyone is slotted, he gets this thing, this benefit. But if I told them that I'm going to give 1 billion people an ID, they said, go ahead, be my guest. So, you know, often these bigger things are easier to get done, and I think you found the same in your life.
Yeah, when you have outside goals that you believe are achievable. I mean, you don't make this stuff up just to delude yourself. You actually have to believe that what you're doing is possible and actually highly probable.
Sure.
Because you don't spend your time on things that you think are
You have a mind to where you want to get.
Yes,
your mind.
You have to see it, and you have to convince other people of it. And if you pick something that's really very interesting and important, then you can get other people to join you. If all you're doing is something somebody else is already doing, but doing it a little bit better, why should somebody leave you? Mm-hmm. It's not that interesting intellectually or in any other way. And its chance of succeeding is actually less because the world doesn't need another one of those.
Sure.
You think they do, but surprisingly, they think you don't, as a rule.
Sure. Steve, I just want to move on to, you have been a huge philanthropist and you have made these huge endowments, $350 million at MIT, 150 million pounds at Oxford, 100 million pounds in Shinjua, Yale 100 million. These are big items. But I see a great passion about, like the one at MIT is about AI and application of AI. And the one at Cambridge, Oxford is about the ethics of AI. So you have big passion for technology, AI and the future as well as the ethical dimensions?
Well, you know, I'm in the heart
Yeah.
of tech world in one of the greatest tech countries in the world. And I am not a tech person. I'm sort of a social science major. And I got involved in technology in a very odd way. I was on a bus. I'm not on buses often, but I was on a bus with sitting next to Jack Ma.
It must be in Davos.
No, this was, I'm on the board of the Chenhua School of Management and Economics International Advisory Board, and we have one meeting a year, and you know, just because you're in the tech world, imagine a board where we had, you know, Jack Ma from Alibaba, Robin Lee from Baidu, Pony Ma from Tencent, Tim Cook from Apple, and Mark Zuckerberg. And those were just the tech guys. At 2 meetings ago, these 5 companies were 5 of the 10 largest market cap in the world. So it's a very interesting board. This is like fascinating board. A lot of the senior officials from the government of China and similarly situated prominent people from other industries. And you know, so we were going to meet one of the state leaders, and they take us by buses So I was sitting next to Jack, and Jack, I don't know whether he's spoken here or not, but Jack's a very fast talker.
Yeah.
And
He was an English teacher before he became an entrepreneur.
and his parents were opera stars. So when Jack speaks, he has perfect posture.
Yeah.
And he presents.
Yes.
He's really
He does speak, he presents.
He's quite magnificent. And so we went on this ride, and he started talking to me about AI, and I asked him what that was.
That was the first time?
I knew nothing. And so he told me, well, this is artificial intelligence, here's what it's going to do. He said the problem is that nobody knows what the negative consequences of this technology are going to be. And I said, what do you mean? So he said, well, Elon Musk thinks this is terrible and with bad consequences, and Ginny Rometty, who is the head of IBM, thinks it's going to work out and really be terrific, and Bill Gates is somewhere in the middle. And I'm thinking to myself, how could such a consequential technology have such ambivalent understandings with all these famous people? And just by the luck of the draw, I knew all those people, right? So I could talk to them, and it became very clear that what people were worried about, among other things, besides bias on algorithms and things like that, is that if the technology was introduced in a very haphazard way, that at least for some period of time, you could have very significant unemployment issues. And if that came to pass in democracies, that could be very destabilizing to a democracy. And nobody was even thinking about these issues. And so I started thinking about them just because Jack started me on that journey. I didn't start myself. I just pursued the journey. And I have a program in China called the Schwarzman Scholars. It's like the Rhodes Scholars.
Yeah.
We have about, right now, 140, 150 students from around the world. We take them to China. And I know it's hard to get into IIT. Schwarzman Scholars is about 3%, but our students are, from places that have 5%, like Harvard and Stanford and MIT and so forth. So I've gotten to know the heads of all the major universities, certainly in the West, and I just happened to be visiting the head of MIT. This will show you how innovation works, like the luck of life. So I was talking with Raphael Rafe about China's efforts in artificial intelligence and the risks to that, and this is like talking to one of the top people in the world. Yeah. And I think if I remember my numbers right, he said about 60% of the people at MIT want to major in computer science. And he said, my whole campus is changing. And he said, America is falling behind China in terms of AI, and we really need to increase competitiveness. And I had met a lot of the people in China who were involved with AI. So I said, this is how you make a mistake and lose your money. I said, well, what would you do? In a perfect world, what do you think should be done? He said, for MIT, what I'd like to do is double the number of computer scientists. I'd like to have them all centralized, but also with 25 of them assigned to the different disciplines within MIT. So by doing that, we would be the first AI-enabled university in the world. And I said, well, if you did that, wouldn't the other competitive universities try and do the same thing, because nobody ever wants somebody to get ahead of them? So he said, well, that's the point of it. It's about knowledge production. It's about global competitiveness, and this would wake the United States up. So I made a further mistake. I said, how much would this cost?
Should never ask that question.
Never ask the head of a university how much something costs.
You asked these IIT guys today, right? They give you a figure.
You would be amazed how quick these people are. And so, you know, in a few days he said, can I come and see you? That's even worse than just giving you the number, right? So he came back and he said, well, he said that'll cost $1.1 billion. And he said, I think we should start a new college of computing. It's the first time since 1950, and it's $1.1 billion. Would you like to give that? I said, the answer is no. I don't want to do that. He said, well, it's sort of like your idea. And I said, well, yeah, I've been, like promoting this conversation with you. But I said, I'm not in for $1.1 billion. He said, well, what are you in for? I said, how little can I do? And apparently it was too little. And so we settled at 350.
But he's a smart guy. He anchored it at $1.1 billion.
Yes.
So that you would feel 350 is cheap.
Yes, well, wherever I was, I got to 350. But then I said, not being a technologist, I said, I think this is really important, but I'll know it's really important if you put up 350 as well. So he looked at me and said, us put up 350? I said, what's the difference of me or you? I mean, I don't even know what I'm doing. You're MIT. And if your board of directors don't think this is that important,
that's a good one.
I shouldn't think it's important.
So they're putting in 350 from their
So they put up 350. It took them about 3 weeks.
Oh, good.
So then we started, with 700, and now we're raising money to the $1.1 billion.
Great.
And so the purpose of this, besides accelerating knowledge creation and sort of computer science, was to take on the issue of AI ethics and do it.
But the AI and ethics you're doing at Oxford.
Oxford is slightly different. As you might imagine at IIT, this is primarily a science-based university, one of the best in the world. MIT is similar, except they've added a little bit of liberal arts. But when I started getting involved with Oxford, they've been doing the humanities for about 900 years. They're ranked #1 in the world. And I looked at it and I said, okay, MIT is going to be approaching AI ethics on a broad basis, but with a real scientific bias. Oxford, on the other hand, has the #1 philosophy department in the world. And if we approach this more from a humanist perspective and, in effect, combine these two streams of knowledge, then we could get something that's really profound. And the Oxford people were interested in that idea, and so we're pursuing it. And this is how you get to be knowledgeable. Now, what happened, because this field is just starting, people actually think I know something, which is actually not that true. But I know what the problems are. And so I get this steady stream of Nobel Prize winners and famous people from around the world connecting. And so for me, as an individual, this has been a fascinating thing.
Sure.
And just to give you one further thing on this, where you would have real knowledge here, I was at Davos at a luncheon, and at these luncheons you get seated or you just fill in a table. So I was seated next to a female journalist from Germany on one side, and another guy whose name I didn't recognize, and it didn't give an affiliation. So I introduced myself, and he mumbled something about his name, and I said, well, what do you do? He said, well, I work at Google. I said, well, that's interesting. What do you do at Google? He said, well, I'm in charge of quantum. So I said, are you the guy who designed the fastest quantum computer in the world? He said, yep, I'm the guy. I said, okay, we're going to be together for about an hour, and I'm going to tell you everything I know about quantum computing. It should take somewhere between 30 seconds and 45 seconds. You are then going to fill up the next part of the hour, and you're going to tell me everything that you know that a generalist could understand, because you're the man. You're the #1 person in the world, and I've had the good luck of being seated next to you.
That's what is called the Davos moment.
For somebody like myself, this is like just such a unique gift intellectually, to have a guy talking about how materials are going to change with quantum, and what he's going to be able to achieve with battery technology. And he started talking about airplanes flying on batteries. I thought you used to have those trucks that you filled the things up with, and they had these, sort of hydrocarbons. He said, you won't need that anymore. Not necessary at all. And so planes are going to completely change. And I said, what about encryption? Because for people interested in any type of security issues, the concept that another country gets quantum and can break your encryption for all communications, military applications, and so forth, is really a very scary concept. And
Steve, let's just switch tracks and talk about Blackstone in India. Not many people realize that you are the biggest owner of commercial real estate in India.
that's true.
And with a team of 20 people or something like that.
We have 700,000 people who are in the buildings,
Okay.
and we're working on doubling our
And you
size.
also have a lot of tech investments in India, like Infosys and others. So, are you bullish on India?
Well, I think a bullish long-term, certainly India has been a great market for us, both in private equity and in real estate. India's growth rates, have gone down recently. Inflation has gone up, and there's an issue, of course, with the banking system and lack of liquidity and extension of credit being constrained. The way economies work is pretty simple. You need to have very healthy financial institutions because economic growth is really correlated with credit extension. And if your financial institutions aren't in great shape, then they can't lend as much, people can't borrow as much, they can't spend money they don't have, and economies just slow down. And this happens all over the world. In most countries, in my career, which is now distressingly like almost 50 years, I've seen a lot of stuff, and I know that you can't have a healthy patient if their heart isn't really healthy. And so the financial system in any country is that heart, and so
But you have this famous saying. One of your percepts is, "Don't lose money." Clearly the Indian, don't lose money.
Yes.
That's your...
Yes, I do not recommend losing money.
Yeah. Clearly the Indian banks didn't get that memo because they have lost a hell of a lot of money.
Yes. Well,
What is your advice to these guys?
what I found is you typically don't get many opportunities to lose money.
You don't get.
After you start losing it, people find you less interesting as a human being. And so what happens around the world when you have situations like that, you typically have to, it's a financial term, charge off those losses. In other words, you don't make pretend those losses haven't happened. You get rid of it, and what you have to do is attract capital to basically allow the institutions to sustain those losses, and those losses typically are with loans that aren't paying interest or paying their principal back. So by making new loans that are better, the institution makes more money and everything works. So there are a lot of
We
different
should probably
mechanisms.
take a class for all our bankers.
There's a lot of different ways you can do that, but what's important, I have found around the world, is you have to do that.
Yeah.
When you don't, for example, the Europeans as a group leave any one bank aside, but after the financial crisis, they did not take those hits.
Yeah, and now
The U.S. Did. Partially as a result, U.S. growth rates are double, sometimes triple the European growth rates. The U.S. right now has probably the most conservative banking system, strong system in the world, along with the Canadians. And that allows us to grow safely.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I'm sure that India will follow the path of addressing that and fixing that system.
I think Amit, we should have the questions from audience. How do you want to do this?
Hello, my question is for Mr. Stephen. Good evening, sir. I'm Shreyans, and my question is, what do you look for when hiring a candidate, and what makes a 10 candidate?
It's a good question.
What's this?
Thank you.
What do you look for when hiring a candidate?
Oh, my goodness.
They're all looking for jobs, so they want advice from you.
First of all, I don't know whether you're applying, but I have so much fun assessing people, meeting them, because it's like meeting a stranger. What are they like? Do they think quickly? Are they careful? Are they curious? How do they do under stress? An interview situation by its nature, it's not stressful for me, but apparently it is for them. And how do they deal with that? What happens if you bring something up? I'm pretty unstructured as a person. I'll talk about anything that interests me at that moment. Maybe a phone call I just got off of, maybe something I just read, maybe about a meeting I just had, because I'm trying to figure out if this individual wants to join a conversation with an adult, because I treat everyone the same. I treat everybody, whether they're 23 years old or 53 years old, I treat them the same. And I want them to treat me the same. I want them to use my first name. I want a horizontal organization. Is this individual prepared for that? Or are they just sort of like scared? If they're scared, they're the wrong person for our organization. They may be fine for another one. I like to figure out how flexible somebody is. And I want to predict how they'll do under stress. Sometimes I'll bring something up where they just don't know the answer, and that's okay. We don't all know the answers to everything, if they say, you know, I've never really had a chance to think about that, and, you know, so there are a lot of things I could say, but none of them have really been thought through. And you just accept that because that's a mature response to something. And are they verbal? Could they convince somebody of something? And are they nice? I have learned that very talented, disagreeable people are bad to have around. I call them nasty pieces of work. And I don't want to be with them. I don't want to have our people exposed to those kinds of people, even if they're gifted. If they're gifted, what I'll say to them is, you seem like a very interesting person. You might be a little angry, I'm not sure, whatever their defect is. And I would recommend you actually go and start your own business because you're clearly gifted. But I don't think you would fit with our culture.
Sure.
And you may have trouble fitting with a variety of different cultures, but in terms of success, you're going to be great. And you should go out and pursue a different path.
Sure. Any other questions?
Hello, sir. Hi, I'm Pragati. So, in the book, you have mentioned that you should learn from your mistakes. So, what was your biggest mistake and how did you recover from it?
Good one.
Yeah, well, one of the things you'll find is that all of us reluctantly make mistakes. And if you make lots and lots and lots of decisions, it's almost unavoidable. The worst decision I made was very early in our firm's history. One of our new partners had an idea of buying a company in the steel distribution business, and one of the other partners heard that this was going on. We had no processes for making investments, and we had just started the firm. And the second partner said he heard about this idea and that it was terrible and that the company was just making inventory profits and was going to go bankrupt as soon as prices of steel went down. So that was somewhat disappointing to me because the first partner thought it was going to be great. So I didn't really know how to handle that, so I had them both come into my office, sit in front of my desk. I made pretend I was King Solomon, and I asked them each to display their intellectual wares. And like the true genius I am, I picked the wrong person. And within 3 months, we couldn't pay our interest. And after 6 months, the company was about bankrupt. And we put a little more money in it. We almost lost that money. And one of my investors called and asked to see me. And I had to go to see him. This is what happens when you lose money. When you make money, they come to see you. When you lose money, you go to see them. And so I went to see this gentleman and sat in front of his desk on a wooden chair. And he proceeded to scream at me. I'll spare you exactly what he said, but you know, the dumbest blah, blah, blah he's ever met was just a warm-up. In my family, no one ever raised their voice. I thought that was normal. Only when I got to college and met some other people did I realize that wasn't normal. So with this guy screaming at me, the way my receptors work, it was like multiplied 3 times. And it almost went on forever as far as I could emotionally take this on. And I realized when I was sitting there that my face was getting really red and hot. And I was so embarrassed, so shamed by this experience that I was going to start crying. And I said, I just can't let myself cry. I can't do that. I'm in charge of an organization. And so I didn't cry, but I walked out I remember it was a sunny day in the fall. The office was right by the Hudson River. The trees were all turning different colors. And I said, I am never going to lose money again for anybody. Never. I'm never going to sit in a situation like that of our making my personal failure. And as a result of that, we designed a whole method of approving deals and writing with risk factors, with a team of really experienced people, debating each of those risks, how likely it was to happen, what the magnitude of damage to the project would occur. And we typically didn't have all the information. We'd send the team back a second time, a third time. And I have another rule I developed. If you're going to a meeting, there are no paid guests. If you're invited to a meeting, you're there to participate. Nobody has the right to sit there and watch other people debate something. They shouldn't be in the room. Go and do something else and be useful. If you're going to be there, you're going to have thought about the issue, you're going to own this decision like the rest of us, and we're all going to debate to get the right answer to protect capital and also, of course, learn about the upside. So without this miserable this situation where we lost all our money, I don't think I ever would have come up with this approach. And we use that approach everywhere in the firm. And just to give you some idea, out of the last 700 deals that we've done, we've only had one bankruptcy, no liquidations. That's less than 1/10 of 1% mistakes. So if you can...
Phenomenal. I think we have time for just a couple of more questions, maybe on this side.
Hello, sir.
Where are you?
Hello, sir. My name is Yash.
Yash, this side, I think, yeah. Yeah, go ahead. But we need people on this side too. Can we have some mics here, please? Yeah, Yash, go ahead while we get...
My question is for you, Mr. Nilekani.
Yeah, tell me.
How different was the experience of chairing UIDAI and developing Aadhaar as compared to the experience of being the CEO and now chairman at Infosys?
Well, I think running a private company and working in government are two very different experiences. You know, running a company, you can take the decisions in the company. You have people who are aligned with your thinking. You have a clear metric of profit. You know, it's very well cut. Working in government is a far more, it's much more complex because there are many people with different ideologies, different agendas. And therefore, the kind of consensus building you have to do to get everybody aligned behind an idea is very, very time consuming. So when I did this, I would go and meet everybody in the country and convince them about the idea and put their weight behind it. So I think the consensus building and getting everybody on board is far more required in government than in a company. But a company has other challenges. You have to deliver profits. You have to work every quarter for growth. But they're two very different experiences. And often it's difficult. I think Steve's partner, Pete Peterson, actually did that. He was the Commerce Secretary in Nixon's government. Nixon's government, as well as he was the co-founder of Blackstone. So I think, but there are not that many people who have done both, I think. So I think maybe this side, we have time for just one or two questions. I think Mrs. Parekh. Can we get a mic, please? No, I think use a mic, so I don't think we can. Can you get it fast? Okay, you have a mic. Why don't you ask? No, let's speak louder.
Hello, am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Nilekani, I had a small question for you, sir. So given the theme of the conference or the fireside chat is on technology, and you have been a role model in technology for India. You started Infosys 4 decades back now, and in these 4 decades, technology has changed so much. So how did you manage to sort of, ride this wave of disruption in the technology space and ensure that Infosys always remained ahead of the curve?
Well, I think as Steve said, you have to, every day you have to keep ahead, every day you have to watch the trends, see what's coming around the corner. You can't afford to relax, you have to be relentless in this because the pace of change is even higher. And so I think you have to keep working at it. And also I think keeping your eyes and ears open and understanding and meeting lots of people, understanding different trends, and then synthesizing from that and trying to come with a point of view. So I think it's an effort we have to do every day to keep up. Otherwise, you rapidly become obsolete in this world. Can you have, if you have the mic, you can bring it to, oh yeah, Smita. This will be the last question, I think, then we'll wrap up.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, please.
2 questions actually. One is, what keeps you awake at night?
He sleeps well, I think.
2, did you ever in your trajectory, in your personal career, have any kind of political ambitions?
Yeah, what keeps me
Awake at night, yeah.
awake at night are typically geopolitical risks and sort of internal politics in a country.
In the country.
It happened to be my country. It's what keeps me awake in the United States, which I saw going very far to the left, and it looks like that won't prevail. But they're the kinds of risks that are uncontrollable. In other words, we have no power over them. And the coronavirus, which isn't a geopolitical risk, but it's a black swan kind of risk, is the kind of thing that I try and figure out. Are we successfully positioned at Blackstone to make sure no matter what happens, we're always in good shape? So it's those types of things that I worry about. And to the extent that I can influence those at all, I try to get it involved. As to the second part of the question, have I thought about going into politics, something of that type? The answer is no. In my country, that's a real contact sport.
I think there are enough billionaires from New York in politics.
What's that?
There are enough billionaires from New York in politics.
Well, we have one billionaire from New York who's attempting to run. But seriously, politics now has devolved into such a contact sport where people make things up about other people. It's really pretty uncivilized, and I think that when I was younger, I thought about doing that, and the world sort of changed. I do get involved politically at different levels on the national, for our government. I try and help them with trade agreements where I know the people, and people in our government don't know them in the same way. And I've been involved with the U.S.-China trade agreement and the new. We call it USMCA, which is the NAFTA agreement, and I do some other things, and I've done that for different presidents, not just Republicans, which I am, but Democrats too. That's part of giving back to a country that's been amazing for me, and if I can help make it better in any way, I'm glad to do it. But being a full-time government official, actually, in a funny way, you have more ability to say what you think if you're not an official. Because if people don't like it, they don't have to call you again, and your life goes on. If you're in a government, particularly in a democracy, it's very hard to take on whoever the president or prime minister is. Doesn't matter which country. It's just hard to constantly be saying, I don't agree with something. You lose your position at court when that happens.
Well, I think we have come to the end of this program. It's been a wonderful interaction with Steve. It's been very inspiring. So let's give him a big hand.
You know, I would say in closing, you are all very, very lucky to have the aptitude and be at a great university like IIT when the world is moving to technology so fast, so influential. You are the cutting edge, and you could make enormous contributions to society, for your family, and you've got the wind at your back. There are many people who are not so fortunate and don't have your aptitude, and you know, you are perfectly positioned for the world we're all moving into. So congratulations and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Nilekani, this was truly an enlightening discussion to be a part of. I would now like to invite on stage the Director of IIT Bombay to felicitate the speakers with a bouquet and a memento.
This is India. It's tradition.
Wonderful. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for coming. This is a book about IIT inside, and this is the front of our building, the facade of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. But I'm traveling light, so I won't be able to take all this stuff. So maybe you can have it. Huh? Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you. Come. Thank you. Come. Come, Steve.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to invite the Deputy Director of IIT Bombay, Professor Suresh, to give the vote of thanks.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you will agree with me that it has been an absolutely exhilarating evening, very stimulating, an extremely candid exposition of what it takes. It's my pleasure to thank, on behalf of the Institute, the guest of the evening, Mr. Stephen Schwarzman, and our distinguished alumnus, Mr. Nandan Nilekani, for taking time out to visit us and conduct this interactive discussion on the advances in technology and India's role in this journey. Mr. Schwarzman, I hope this will be the first of many more visits by you to our institute. And of course, it's always a pleasure to have Mr. Nandan Nilekani visit us. I also thank the distinguished delegates accompanying the guests for this visit to our institute. I extend my gratitude to the participating faculty, student and staff members of the institute, the public address system, CDEEP, Estate Office, Public Health Office, Security Section, IIT Bombay's E-Cell team, Public Relations Office, and all the teams of Blackstone who have worked tirelessly to make this event a grand success. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for coming. Please note that refreshments are being served outside.